I was watching this presentation earlier on today by Ramachandran, the neurologist and I guess neurosurgeon, is he? Perhaps something like that. There's a lot of work in neuroscience anyway, particularly tracking the relationships between cognitive science and behaviour and a kind of phenomenology of what it's like to have certain neurological defects or disorders. Fascinating stuff. I mean, it's a lot of the stuff he did in this talk, and I'll put a link in the description box, is stuff he's gone over before in other books. A lot of stuff about Capgras syndrome, about phantom limbs, some really interesting stuff about the body maps, the different maps that exist in the brain of the body. Some of that I hadn't come across before, but most of it I had. But he did this one bit which was completely new to me. I'm not really sure if I believe it really. It was so interesting, but it sounds hard to believe. I'll have to find out, I guess. But he's talking about mirror neurons, which is these neurons or clusters of neurons in the brain, which fire in response to our seeing another person carry out an action. But they don't just fire in response; they seem to fire in ways which simulate the action. So if I see you reach out and grab something, the same neurons or some of the same neurons that are firing in your brain, which initiate that action, will fire in my brain as well when I watch you do it. My brain will mirror your brain to kind of simulate the action. The only difference being that my brain will not send those signals to the kind of motor centres, so I don't actually carry out the action. But up to that point I am kind of doing a VR version of your action inside my head, which is really interesting. And similarly, if something happens to you, something physical happens to you, if you put your hand on a table and somebody whacks your finger with a hammer, something like that, and I see that, or even if I just see that in a film, again my mirror neurons will map that activity. So whatever that person is going on inside that person's, or some of what's going on inside that person's brain, will immediately go on inside my brain. But again, the only difference being that whereas that person actually feels pain, I don't feel the pain. I have something of the experience, but I don't literally feel the pain. And this is what Ramachandran was talking about. And he said that in addition to the mirror neurons, we also have what he called empathy neurons, which I think is a bad term, but because I think in a sense it's the opposite, but it doesn't really matter. But he's basically saying what's happening there, why we duplicate and simulate some of the experience, but we don't feel the pain in this case, or in the previous case we don't actually carry out the action, is because there is a signal being sent from that part of our body to the brain, which gives true information, which contradicts or countermands. Is that the right word? Countermands? Anyway, which suppresses the signal basically to stop it being carried through, so it doesn't become part of our sensory motor activity. We don't carry out the action, nor does it become part of the kind of landscape of our true feelings. We don't feel the pain. So for example, this thing about being hit by a hammer, so we see someone with their hand on the table and they get their finger hit by a hammer really hard. The mirror neurons, which correspond to their neuronal activity of being hit, our mirror neurons fire, and that's sent to a certain part of the brain where these things are collated. But at the same time as that, the signals being sent from our own physical hand, reporting on their state, and there is no arousal in the hand. There's no nerve endings being triggered in the hand, so that information goes into the same part of the brain where it's collated with the other mirror neuron signals, and that acts as a suppressant and stops the information being sent from that kind of simulation through to the pain centres, where we actually receive that information as pain. So you see it, but you don't feel the pain, or you simulate it, but you don't feel the pain. And as I say, Ramachandran called that empathy, because we kind of feel for the person, but we don't feel as the person. You know what I mean? We're not feeling the pain as if we were the person, we're just feeling for them in this kind of mirrored way. Right, okay, so the thing, he went on a quite poetic way about this, but what he basically said at that point is that our brains, your brain and my brain, the person whose hand is being hit and my brain watching that action, our brains are kind of entangled. You know, some of our minds at least are kind of entangled, because obviously most of our minds are in our head, but some of the mind process takes place out there in the watched space, you know, the space of action, and some of that minding process takes place in our hands, but it also takes place in the hammer that's hitting our hand. And the minding process includes all of those sensations and the causes of those sensations. And he says that the minding process that I am having as a watcher is entangled with the minding process that you're having as an experiencer, entangled by this mirroring process. And the only thing that's keeping us apart, he says, is our skin. It's our skin in that case that's sending the signals to this part of our brain that collates it, saying, don't worry, it's not you that's being hit. Just don't worry, it's not you that's being hit. Which sounds fantastic and wacky, but he says there's experimental evidence for this, and this is the bit I find hard to believe, really. He says two things. Firstly, if you are a recent amputee and you've got a phantom limb, but it's very common for people who've got phantom limbs to experience sensation in their limb, even though it's not actually there. You know, they feel as if their arm is hurting or their fingers are hurting or something like that. So if they've got that and they see someone whose arm whose hand is being hit, the one that they've got amputated, then they do feel the pain. You know, not only do they simulate the action, they actually feel the pain, even though they haven't got an arm or a hand to feel it in. Because by the same token that they haven't got a hand to feel the pain in, they also haven't got any skin, any of those nerve endings to send a correct signal to the part of the brain that collates this information to suppress that stimulation and send it to the pain centre. And similarly, and it's not even, and the second example he says, you don't even have to be amputated to get this. He says if you anaesthetise the arm, so if I've anaesthetised my arm now, completely anaesthetised it, and then I watch someone get their hand hit with a hammer, then I will feel that pain in the arm that's been anaesthetised, because the mirror neurons in my brain will have simulated the action. But again, there won't be a signal coming from my skin, because my skin is dead at this point. There won't be a signal going from my skin telling my brain, don't worry, it's not you that's being hit. My brain will think it's me being hit because those mirror neurons are firing, and it will get sent to the pain centre, and I will feel the pain of the other person. Not just feeling for that person, but feeling as that person. I mean, that's wild, isn't it? I find it very difficult to believe. I'm going to find out. But I thought it was really interesting. Yeah.